this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. Our next innovation thought leadership discussion focuses on the emergence of business networks and how that requires new models of doing business and new ways of relating to customers and partners. Quite rapidly, we have entered a business world where unprecedented connectedness leads to instant analysis. These insights across entire industries provide powerful new ways for businesses to innovate and to adapt to markets, supply chains, and customer demands. All things being equal, the companies that best leverage this data-driven innovation and these business network effects will surely win in their markets. We're here today with two experts to discuss the future of enterprise software and the role that business networks will play in creating new models for sustained success. To learn more about doing business in our digital and connected world, please join me in welcoming our guests. We're here with Alex Atzberger, President of SAP Ariba. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for having me.
And we're also here with Christian Lang, the CEO and co-founder of Tradeshift. Welcome, Christian.
Welcome, Dana. It's great to be here and also with Alex.
All right. Well, we've had this ongoing confluence of cloud, mobile, big data, and we're seeing streamlined business processes happen as a result of these, and it seems to be accelerating and empowering business network effects. So my first question to you, Christian, is how is this disrupting businesses, and how do they turn that disruption into a benefit and business agility?
I think not just, and I think as you mentioned initially, cloud, confluence of mobile, all of these things is happening right now, and it's a massive disruption for the Fortune 5000. We never really seen anything on this scale, but I want to point out two sort of key areas. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, what you were doing with your supply chain were very Baxter, and it was very large-scale business. It was all about reducing the cost of transactions. We saw the rise of, let's say, for instance, BPOs, where you did a lot of outsourcing of your processes, a lot of outsourcing of transactions. And it was all about a cost-steady supply chain. But if you look at today, the main paradigm has switched completely. What you see is it's all about agility. It's all about the speed of data. And I think we find that a lot of the solutions we implemented in the 90s and the early 2000s tended to focus on reducing cost. And that very often came on, with the flip side of increasing the cost of change because we put everything into very rigid processes and very rigid structures. And one of the things that business networks is really transforming right now, and I think both what's happening on Alex's side of the table and our side of the table is that we're now wiring the full supply chain. We're connecting all of the processes and bringing in all of the data in real time. And that's an extremely fundamental switch from a world where everything used to be fax, PDF, paper up till actually quite recently. So I think it's a tremendous disruption. It's probably the biggest we've seen in business software in the last 30 years. And it's very exciting to be here because we're just at the very tip of the iceberg for this whole revolution.
And Alex, disruption can be a negative, but disruption could also be something that creates opportunity. How are you seeing the market as an opportunity rather than a destruction?
Yeah, building on what Christian said, and if I look at the customer conversations I'm having, all customers are realizing that digitization, the confluence of the different trends that was just spoken about, are absolute opportunities to change the business model of companies actually. And if they don't do it, they will actually die. And I think that's the part where, if you look now at the Fortune 500 versus what it was, 20 years ago, you see obviously such an enormous change. And it doesn't matter which part of the industries you are in, if it's retail, if it's financial services, if it's consumer products, whatever it is, you need to adopt a strategy of actually thinking about how can you use digital technologies for your benefit. Because if you don't, you will fall behind. But the other fundamental thing that has changed, and that's actually an opportunity for companies, is that the user has moved to the center of the conversation. So the aspects of the consumer technology world that we bring into the business context has fundamentally change the people's requirements on technology, but also people's adoption rates of technology. And the reason why companies like SAP Ariba or Tradeshift are obviously growing and seeing a lot of demand for our solutions is because we see that companies are embracing the change because they know embracing is the only way forward.
And of course, we've seen the disruption on the B2C side of things with eBay years ago, Uber now, Airbnb, changing industries rapidly. But how does this affect the B2B interactions, the commerce? Is it the same, or do we just extend what we've seen in B2C to B2B, or why would B2B commerce be different or more challenging? First to you, Christian.
I think it's absolutely impacting, and I think I'll start with a point that Alex made, that the consumer has moved to the center of the conversation. The user has moved to the center, right? It's about usability, ease of use. If you take something like Tradeshift, we focused very early on making everything mobile first, because we realized that the future B2B processes were all mobile. If you take a country like China, there's a 97% smartphone penetration and a 60% PC penetration. If you want to run your supply chain there, you want to be mobile enabled, you want to be mobile centric, and you want to create whole new user experiences. I think the other area where the consumerization of B2B is happening and increasing is on what I call apps. So in the past, big enterprise systems, they used to use the concept of modules. You could load new functionality, but it was sort of very hard to do. It required your IT department. It was very complex and challenging. And today, Salesforce, they were really the pioneers, but we have these app platforms. It's very easy, for instance, on Tradeshift to load a new app, to get a new set of functionality going really, really quickly, and it's easy for the customers to change very quickly and adapt to the business environment. The last area where I think consumerization is hitting the enterprise is on insights. When I use Twitter, Airbnb, I get real-time feedback. If I send a tweet, I immediately know the reach, how many users saw the tweet. I can go in and see the analytics of that tweet, and I can make decisions as a consumer based on that feedback loop. In the enterprise, there's been a tendency in the past that a lot of the business intelligence, the analytics we built were more like centralized reports going to the top and actually not benefiting the people who are sitting on the front line doing the work, doing the business. And I think where we're going today is really using the network data, using the real-time data, really going to a real-time level with these people. And I think that's the last huge disruption you'll see in the enterprise. So real-time insights, the use of apps as a driver and metaphor for delivering new functionality, and a whole new paradigm for user experience and user friendliness.
And Alex, for companies that maybe have a hard time adapting rapidly, that are still using legacy software, that prefer on-premises deployments, that are just really now just moving past paper-based processes, how do we encourage them to recognize the change and adapt?
Dana, one expression I tend to use with companies is to say, solutions need to be consumer simple, business strong. And what I mean by that is when you are in the B2B space, you need to obviously recognize that the requirements to security, the requirements to integration, the requirements between data and other pieces have a different level of complexity than it is when you use an eBay or a Twitter. And I think the role of technology companies today is to remove friction as much as possible for companies to enjoy the same benefits that a user would in the consumer world. Yet at the same time, the providers have to obviously ensure that there is a business strength to the solutions that gives companies the comfort to move to a cloud environment. So if you are a financial services institution and you have worked on-premise software all the time, you obviously had full control of making changes to the software. You knew it was where it was running, etc. And as you're moving this to the cloud, you're gaining the benefits of faster innovation, but you can't give up on the necessity for security, for instance, and for sound information. And that's oftentimes why we see obviously customers tending to choose companies like SAP to go with, because of the experience that companies have managing data, ensuring integrity of the information, and ensuring the security. But a lot of conversations that we have with companies is about how do you, on the one hand, deliver that wonderful consumer simplicity, but yet at the same time deliver on the business strength. And I think especially in procurement this is relevant because you can make it so easy through an app to order products, but if you're in procurement, you don't want your employees to just buy things randomly just because it's not easy to do. You want to obviously have the controls and compliance in place to actually manage your spend, have visibility in the spend, and actually manage your company. So that's where I think the crux of the matter is. And if we solve this for our customers, I think customers are ready to move to the cloud.
Christian, it sounds as if Alex is calling for a balance between the governance and benefits of traditional software and business applications while also exploiting the newer agility from mobile, from feedback loops, from consumer. It's almost as if we have two companies within one nowadays. How are you seeing that balance, and how do you help companies achieve the right balance?
Yeah, no, I think it's of course natural, and I think Alex and I think it's also can probably recognize that we come from both sides of the equation here. Alex, he's trying to transform what traditionally has been an on-premise company and going towards the cloud, and I obviously come from a cloud-first company and trying to breach into some of these complex use cases, which I completely want to acknowledge. I mean, Alex is spot on. Security is still a massive issue, especially with the data we deal with here. So I think it is about finding that balance. It's also why we can't use the consumer apps and consumer app models. We need to have security models around it. We need to have a lot of things. But on the other hand, this stuff is also getting very robust. You saw some recent breaches last year. There was the Sony story with all of the emails that was leaked. That was actually an on-premise system that was penetrated. I'm quite sure if that had been a cloud-based provider like Google or Microsoft, that penetration had never happened. So I also think we've got to question ourselves that in a threat environment like today, can each individual enterprise actually uphold the security that's required, or in a way, are we seeing that cloud companies like mine or Alex's, we in a way become specialists in securing our domains and securing the data within that domain, right? I also think when we talk about this balance, it's clearly. When we talk about compliance, for instance, I think there's sort of two paradigms. You can have control and compliance up front. The risk of that is obviously you limit adoption and thereby limit impact on the business case side. On the other hand, as Alex says, we can't just have people going in procurement and randomly buying everything, but can we guide them better? Can we give them real-time data to show them the consequences of what they could do instead, maybe rather than put up a wall as the first step? And I think that's where there's a lot of innovation happening right now and a lot of thinking.
All right, let's go and revisit this notion of business networks. It seems to me also that as we move towards cloud models, as we look to systems of record as services, the data becomes more transferable, shareable, manageable, not siloed, not isolated. And so it seems to me that the more data and access to process information you have, the more of an advantage you have by being able to actually analyze these things in context and in total rather than isolated as in the past. So how do we as suppliers to enterprises help them recognize the benefit of combined network efficiencies, of looking to a provider to actually help them integrate and understand all of the data that's at their disposal? Let's start with you, Alex. How do we help make business networks palatable to organizations and trust the supplier to do, or the vendor to do more and more when it comes to bringing these sources of information together?
Yeah, this is an exciting topic, Dana, because if you look at it, obviously networks in their essence have a network effect, which obviously means as more people are connected to a network, the more valuable the network overall becomes to all participants. And that's something that we see very much in the Ariba business model, where today we have 2 million companies connected to the network. And when I go into certain markets, for instance, and we talk to certain customers about their supplier base, it makes a difference when 50, 70, 80% of those suppliers are already connected to the platform. And if you step back and think about point-to-point connections like EDI that existed in the past to create connections between companies, now you suddenly have a network where you have the baseline to add additional services to a network to actually enrich the experience for everyone who actually participates in the network. And it's very, very important to understand that, from our perspective, when we talk about procurement, I also look at the supplier side as a customer. So there's value on both sides. So when we talk, for instance, about mobile apps, the mobile apps don't just exist on the buyer side, they also exist on the supplier side. And that's a very, very important part of this. Now, as you bring new services, for instance, payments, supply chain information, forecast information, into the network, these are some of the most rapidly adopted solutions that we see because people already have the network in place and can now do more with it. It's very similar to, if you look back at social networks, it started pretty much with a status update, and today, you can share more and more of your life and actually do more and more things on a network, and that's the power of it. Yet at the same time, again, the data needs to be secure. Companies need to feel they actually do business with other trusted entities, which brings in the whole topic of supplier risk, of having transparency into who the suppliers actually are that you do business with, but also identifying new sources of supply. So that becomes very, very powerful. And then underneath everything is obviously the actual data that sits there, and opening up that information in the platform for companies to actually analyze, benchmark themselves is extremely powerful. So I often talk about the application, the network, and then the data play is really the three dimensions that companies should be thinking about as they embrace a network strategy.
A whole greater than the sum of the parts. How do you see business networks unfolding, and how do organizations take advantage of it?
So first off, I think, this is one of the areas where Alex and I, we wholeheartedly agree. When Gartner, they came out with the new hype cycle for procure to payment, one area that they pointed out was a whole new category called multi-enterprise grid. And that's, of course, a mouthful of a word to swallow, but what they really said was that the future for enterprise connectivity is something brand new. It's not the business networks in the sense that we know them today. It's not the EDI networks. It's something where information can flow in all directions. It's a full stack of information, not just transactional data, but also, as Alex talked about, real-time insights, analytics data, logistics data, collaboration, and so on. And there was only really two providers mentioned in that category, which is rated by Gartner to be one of the most impactful over the next 5 to 10 years. And the two providers were Tradeshift and Ariba. And obviously, as a company here who's a third of the age of Ariba, we were proud to be in that category. But I think it shows the focus that both of these companies we have on this area. Now, I think one thing we did well, and I also think points to the future of this, is we started out as a supplier network. Before we built any buyer functionality, we actually designed a completely functional supplier network. And we help suppliers join for free, get access, run all of these services, and then slowly we build out our enterprise portfolio. And that meant that from the beginning, Tradeshift has always been network first. Every single feature we build on the enterprise, every single aspect of our platform we design with this idea of how will we utilize the network, how will we build collaboration into it, how will our partners, how will our app partners use these things. And I think, to the point of the openness, Tradeshift was born with a completely open set of APIs. Anybody can go and develop on the platform. Anybody can put out applications. The long tail of the supply chain will become increasingly important for networks as we move forward. Because as we're moving into much more complex transactions, as we move into much more complex data, we will need to connect every single supplier. If you take something like risk, for instance, is one of the examples that Alex mentioned. Risk, you are as exposed to the tiny supplier as you are to the big North American supplier you've been doing business with for 10 years, maybe even more. So I think if you ask me what's the future of networks, I think it will be three things. It will be connect everyone rather than connect the top 10%. It will be a multi-enterprise grid, which means it's moving in all directions and data are connected in all directions, both from the supplier side and from the buyer side. And finally, it will be open, but I think to echo Alex, open but secure. People will be able to build and innovate on top of these platforms, but within a secure framework and secure context.
Right, great, thank you. Now, Alex, SAP has been around for quite some time, and the sort of conventional wisdom nowadays is that if you're a legacy provider, that you're somehow at a disadvantage in the cloud environment. And yet, SAP recently reported very strong growth, and I think this validates somewhat of a different approach or a different perception of a legacy vendor. Tell us a little bit of why you think SAP is growing while other vendors, in some cases, are struggling.
Yeah, if you look at it, obviously, as a company that has been in business for 42 years, we know one or two things about going through different technology cycles, and each technology cycle requires you to obviously transform your company. And I think what SAP did right in this transformation is that it actually acquired businesses to move the business forward. A significant investment in outside R&D, basically, by bringing in capabilities into SAP. But then when the companies got acquired, each company is actually managed as an entrepreneurial entity within inside the business. And for me, that's very, very important. Belong to a family where my father actually had his own business, etc., where I really believe in it's really important that companies focus on innovation and actually have a capability to have an entrepreneurial mindset and a founder's mindset inside a business. And I respect companies like Tradeshift and other companies that are emerging very, very much because of that founder's mindset of those businesses. And the power, obviously, is the scale at which you can impact change at a company like SAP. And that's where actually, so much of the transformational capabilities are coming from. With 250,000 customers on the SAP side, touching 70% of the world's transactions, imagine what type of base this gives to Ariba, which today touches 1 trillion, or actually facilitates 1 trillion worth of commerce, to actually expand and build on it, and all the technical capabilities that come with it. So I always like to say, I want SAP Ariba to be the fastest growing startup inside a large company. And how do we do this? It's by actually both, focusing on that innovative mindset of a startup company and combining it with all the assets that come from a larger company. And I quite frankly think that's a very valuable proposition, both for the customer as well as for having passionate employees to actually deliver the best results.
Now, Christian, there's also conventional wisdom that says if you're an agile newcomer, if you're of, by, and for the cloud, then you have advantages and you can run circles around old companies. How does that work for you, and how do you see that playing out?
I want to start by saying, being in the challenger position, and I think we are the challenger to SAP Ariba here in this market, obviously has its advantages. But I also want to say that Alex and Ariba is obviously one of the competitors that we respect the most. And I think Alex has been doing an amazing job also of invigorating a company like Ariba, which is 20 years old. But I also think you got to remember, moving from a whole new stack and moving from a whole new sort of solutions, you also have its advantages. Sure, we're a challenger, but we're not that new anymore. We actually have 500,000 companies on our network. We have total global coverage. We have some of the largest names in the world also on our customer list. Obviously not as big as SAP is, right? But it's true that we can probably move a little faster, and we can probably also innovate a little faster. And maybe also sometimes, tease Alex and friends on social media a little faster. But I think it's done with a lot of respect. And I think, I definitely see, there's place both for an incumbent and a challenger in this market. And I think it's a very healthy competition because we're both striving to really do better for our customers. And I think one thing as a challenger is, we've also been attracting a lot of innovators within this industry. I think there's other players that has focused much more on copying where Ariba was today, and not really innovating. And I think That's the wrong way to start with a cloud stack, and that's the wrong way to think about what you want to do. We always came with first principles. We wanted to build something different. We've done that within procurement. We've done that within our risk offering, within our network. It's very, very different. And that also means there's a choice in the market. And I think that's actually really healthy. And, we're also attracting customers that like that innovation, that are thinking in new ways about their supply chain. But at the end of the day, my biggest integration partner is still SAP, So it's still, I don't know if you want to talk about, friendly competition here, but it's certainly, a market that has multiple angles.
Yeah.
And if I can just maybe make one more comment on that. I think it's also important to understand that oftentimes for customers, it's important to see that a trend or a movement gets validated by multiple companies. And I think when the cloud came about first, and when there were innovators like Salesforce, for instance, moving companies there. I mean, today it has become absolutely mainstream. Obviously all companies with different sort of cloud offerings. But it's for me very good to hear. Obviously also with Tradeshift, going into the network message with Ariba. That's actually important because companies know when they actually invest in something, it's actually a concept. And that's why I think you're talking to two innovators in this space. And that actually gives more companies confidence also to invest in something new and to actually say, okay, we want to actually go down this journey. And, I think this is good that you're taking this topic onto this call today, because I do think it's a massive trend going forward.
I'm a big fan of showing and not just telling, and doing that through a use case or a customer example. So Christian, I wonder if you could relay to us, maybe by name or maybe just by generic description, a customer scenario or use case scenario that really demonstrates Tradeshift's approach and value, and help our audience understand why your network effects through your lens are so powerful.
I absolutely can, and I'll take a very recent example, right? So we just announced, I think it's actually like a month ago, a big international customer, Zurich International, which is an insurance company, huge global company, very conservative industry, been around for 150 years, and of course, very sensitive customer data. And they were having a lot of struggles with how they solved the process and how they got the people inside the company engaged around actually driving impact and value in these processes. So we showed them at the time our brand new procurement platform called Tradeshift Buy, combined with the Tradeshift network. And there were sort of three things that stood out for them. The first thing was we treated what today probably is called rogue buyers, or people who's going outside the spend category, as regular users, and said, hey, these are actually people who are passionate about your company, who's trying to drive value, and even willing to take enough risk that they're not always following the rules. Let's try to give them some tools so they at least participate and we can get their spend under control. The second thing we did was we showed the collaboration aspects with the supply chain and showed how you in real time could collaborate with your suppliers around categories and also with your procurement department. Because in a lot of companies, procurement departments gets a little alienated. They become the enemy. If I'm trying to do something, they're the bottleneck. I think one of them we had in here said we're the department of cheap. And I don't think that's the case, They're actually also strategic parts of driving value in your business. So we really tried to build a procurement platform where they became equal citizens and became helpers. So if you're trying to buy something, if you're trying to solve a problem, you can engage with them in the solution phase, not just in, when it's the last step and you got to send the PO. And the last bit was essentially, the ability to roll this out globally for their supply chain. They're a huge global company, and knowing that, having confidence that they could get the onboarding rates. And they looked at a lot of solutions, and I think when it comes down to it today, there is only really two true network solutions in the world. This is Ariba and Tradeshift. The rest is not having all of these platform capabilities and not having this broad scope.
Alex, the same question to you. Do you have a use case example by name or generically that illustrates the power of the composition of Ariba services and the ability of network effects to benefit customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you a couple of different examples, maybe just giving you a little bit different flavors of different ones. If you take a company like AIG, the insurance company, I urge you to look at on YouTube at their video talking about how they actually drove about a $300 million business case through the Ariba platform, and that was driven through taking all categories of spend actually onto the Ariba platform, including, by the way, legal services, which is something where a lot of companies say, we can't actually bring this into an e-sourcing environment. So that's an exciting case. Another one, for instance, if you take the 13th largest retailer in the world, Groupe Auchan, the French company that actually, went to suppliers and said, no business, no Ariba. Yeah. Basically, you need to be on Ariba in order to do business with them. And it's really a strong business-driven case of what actually it means if you have a strong procurement department lead the change and actually do this not just in France, but actually across Russia and China, markets where they operate in. You take companies, though, like, for instance, a BHP, in Australia and in Singapore, that drives more than 90% of their spend actually over the platform and connects their suppliers to it, which is one of, I think, just one of the best-in-class examples of a sourcing organization and procurement organization, but also then going into China to identify new sources of supply. And that's something where we are working with them on really extending that global reach, which is becoming so important, obviously, to global sourcing strategies. And then I would, point out new customers that we are excited to have as part of the Ariba community, like First Data. First Data had the largest IPO last year in the US. It's a payments company, but really a technology company as well. And if I look at what they want to do actually with the platform and also what we are doing in partnership with them around B2B payments, that is a very exciting use case as well. And I think, when you look at some of the names I just gave you, obviously the size of those companies, oftentimes, the suppliers, we are talking in the tens of thousands, obviously, of suppliers that these companies have. And in the last quarter alone, we enabled another 80,000 plus suppliers on the network. That's where a lot of the power of the community and the network comes from.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing to what Alex said, because I think what he's also showing with his cases is the breadth of industries and global reach that this customer base and who can use networks. We see exactly the same, within airlines, companies like Air France, retail, fashion, manufacturing. I don't think there's a single industry we don't have on the platform. Also new companies like LinkedIn within services and so on. So I just want to echo what Alex said, is that it's really, really broad set of industries and customers who are starting to utilize networks. And I don't think there's anyone who won't use this or in the future or won't have this. It will be a default as having an ERP system is today.
Yeah. Well, that segues very well to my last area to touch on today, and that's looking to the future. I think we've only begun to explore the depths of the data feedback and analysis capabilities within commerce and within retail, for example, of the user experience and real-time interactions and customization. So before we close out, thinking about any companies that might be resisting this notion of taking advantage of the network and starting to do the groundwork in order to be able to realize those feedback loops and analysis benefits. Starting with you, Christian, what would you say to a company that is still somehow not interested in taking advantage of networks, business networks, and what potentially could they miss out on if they don't start doing the groundwork now in order to be able to be a digital business with deep data-driven analysis capabilities being pervasive?
I think we got to go all the way back to the beginning of this discussion, which is what also Alex pointed out, the companies that don't change and innovate today, they will be gone. I mean, we have seen more companies disappear out of the Fortune 500 and be gone the last 20 years than we have in the history of business, and it's accelerating. So I think there's three key things you gotta miss out on if you don't invest in networks. And the first one is the ability to know and know fast. Today, knowing is way more important than necessarily just the cost of things or the cost of transactions. We see huge Fortune 500s that are struggling just with reporting their most basic numbers to the shareholders. You see activist shareholders being more and more aggressive on having insights on how these companies are run. The second thing is agility. Agility is probably the single most important strategic capability in 2016 and onwards. And I think if you look at companies, we're talking much smaller batch sizes, we're talking new competitors coming up. You can take a company like P&G, who recently got disrupted by Dollar Shave Club, a company that spent less than $1 million on marketing, taking a shot at a $13 billion market. If your supply chain is set up in such a way you cannot react to that kind of disruption quickly, if you can acquire new suppliers that can help you fight off these threats, you're done. And I think lastly is, if you don't have a connected supply chain, you miss out on the advantage of getting new processes rolled out. I think Alex, he made the reference to say, social networks, they started with the status feed. Well, in our case, once you're connected on Tradeshift, once you have a supply up and running, if you want to roll out any new business process, any kind of new connectivity, it's as easy as pushing a new app. Whereas somebody who don't have this technology, well, rolling out a new business process for many companies, we talk about a 3 to 5 year lifespan to get to the whole supply chain. So I think, agility, speed, and essentially just not being disrupted is the three key reasons I would point to.
Alex, Christian paints the picture of business networks as existential. You really don't have a choice, but a lot of companies are still struggling with how to go about this. Is there an order to it? How should I begin rationally without getting caught up in complexity and losing control of my company? What advice, Alex, would you give companies on how to start the process of becoming a digital business to retain that governance but still get these agility benefits?
Look, if your company is slightly more conservative or wondering about how best to take advantage of this, you have to go back to some of the basics. Of course, there has to be a business case. Start with a business case around the benefits and the cost. What is currently the infrastructure cost you, the paper-based processes cost you to actually do business with your suppliers? What are the benefits that you would have, as Christian pointed out, if you could actually extend more and more capabilities over the network? And that itself is value. Then the second piece is, engage in things like design thinking about envisioning what the future could look like. Bring together different people out of your companies cross-functionally to actually think about, how you could envision doing more with the assets you have and actually creating new capabilities. And that's where things get really exciting when you think about, maybe we shouldn't be thinking about the network just as something where we are, buying from, but maybe it's something that we become a supplier into. And we have many customers, by the way, who do both, who are both buyers and suppliers on the network, and there's value in that as well. And then, finally, it's about, understanding, anything that you digitize doesn't mean that your business becomes, somehow less involved or somehow detached from your suppliers. It's actually the opposite. You become more relevant. You, as a buyer, you become a customer of choice to your supplier. And I think that's very powerful, because at the end of the day, you could argue that as a consumer, for instance, you start to obviously, prefer those companies that actually have a digital relationship with you. And that's what, networks really build and give you, is to build this digital relationship between your suppliers and the buyers. And, again, I think, conservative companies, happy to talk to them, Dana. If you have any names, send them my way. But we'd love to engage.
Or my way.
and we'd love to obviously have that conversation. But, it comes back to the fact that there's real value in this, obviously, and it gives all the things that Christian talks about with the agility and other benefits as well. And it both makes sense strategically as well as from the business case. And if those things come together, companies have a great future.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a Briefings Direct discussion focused on the emergence of business networks and how that now requires new models of doing business. We've heard how companies that best leverage this data-driven innovation and these business networks will gain significant advantages in their markets. And lastly, we've learned that the use of business networks creates new models for sustained success. So please join me now in thanking our guests. We've been joined by Alex Atzberger, President of SAP Ariba. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Dana. Enjoyed this thoroughly, and thank you, Christian.
Yes, and thank you, Christian Lang, CEO and co-founder, TradeShift.
Thank you so much, Dana, and thank you, Alex. I'll see you out there.
Absolutely.
And also a big thank you to our audience for joining us for this SAP Ariba-sponsored Business Innovation Thought Leadership discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.